This is Gina L Osborn, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
I love it. Spy versus Spy episode. Gina was a counterintelligence agent in the U.S. Army, just like old Pedro. And so I always like to have these conversations because of the ins and outs of CI. And Gina, like we're in a counterintelligence group on Facebook, and there's a lot more cantankerousness than there is collaboration on there. What makes us, as counterintelligence folks, as spies, what makes us so weird socially? Why do we do things like think everybody else is going to give all the secrets away?
We come from that generation. I think 9/11, I think that changed everything. But you and I come from the day where you had the walls up and everything was compartmentalized and it was all spooky spy stuff. But I think it's changed a lot over the years. I think it's kind of trending back that way a little bit. But ever since 9/11 happened, the walls came down a lot, but I think they're going back up a little bit.
I can see that. We tend to like the silo in the CI world. And then the other thing is having this conversation. I posted in that group and someone responded, they know who you are and everything, and they was positive. But I'm sure there are people that are skipping that post because they don't like that we're talking about, in this case, intelligence, counterintelligence on there. But what on earth can we say on here that would be in any way compromising? I mean, I don't want you to say anything compromising, but there were so many things we can talk about with the ins and outs of how we learn and everything else. So let me ask you this question. You feel free to ask me whatever you want to. When you left counterintelligence school, whether it was the beginning course, the next course, or any of the courses, did you ever feel like you were adequately prepared to do your job, especially considering the breadth of all the different things you can do day to day?
Gosh, well, before I went to counterintelligence school, I was a cocktail waitress, so absolutely not. I went from a cocktail waitress to basic training to Fort Huachuca to learn how to be a counterintelligence agent assistant, and then I was out in the field for a year, and then I went back. But no, I think when you have old timers, I mean, they know. When you have 20 years experience, that's when you really know. But it takes a long time to get to that point.
It sure does. And the stack of books is bigger than what I can do on this screen that you have to master, not read. You have to really master them. Yeah. If you would have stayed in, how close did it come for you to stay in? Obviously you transitioned into the FBI. We can get into that part of your background, but what job would it have been in the Army where you're like, you know what, I'll hang on for a couple more years? Because you got out and you were smart and you took on another federal career and probably took the best path possible. But was there a job in the Army for you that would have made you want to stay in?
I don't think so. Not at that time, because I got out around the same time that the wall came down in Germany. I was stationed in Frankfurt at the time. And at that time, the wall came down. We were kind of confused as to who the enemy was. And I was assigned to the super whiz-bang team. And prior to the wall coming down, we were driving around in Mercedes and Audis and BMWs. And after the wall came down, they gave us Jettas and Fords. So yeah, it was time for me to
go. That's hilarious. What part of Frankfurt were you in? Do you mind me asking? Can you say? I was in Darmstadt and Hanau.
I did some time in Darmstadt, but I was in Frankfurt proper.
That's awesome. And then when I was there, I was in what they call a stratical unit for the audience. It means that sometimes we did stuff in garrison wearing suits with our badges, and other times we put camo on our face and we laid in the grass, and then we got up and we went into town and practiced source meets. So it'd be hilarious. We would have relaxed grooming standards when we were in town, but we had to come back. We had to be all shaved up and ready to go for war. And so literally you had to shave. You had no choice, but you'd go from laying on the ground and sitting there practicing, like guarding my position. And then you'd be like, all right, now go be the mayor of Aschaffenburg in this case, and drink hot chocolate and talk to Gina and role play a source meet. That was like the craziness. So you could be doing a clearance investigation, a Saida brief, or practicing source meets in Aschaffenburg.
Yeah, I was assigned to a team where we did a lot of surveillance. So I was in a car for a lot of the time. And anytime a major espionage case came up, the team was deployed to anywhere in Germany. So that's we were on the road probably 9 months out of the year.
That sounds so exciting. But you and
It
I
was,
both know surveillance. And then were you ever on counter surveillance or counter surveillance? Any of the other branches of it?
yes, yeah, we were out doing any sort of major event that was going on with regard to any espionage investigation. We were called out to support it in some way.
What did you like about that job?
You know, you just never knew where you were going to be at any given time. So one day you'd be at the PX and you'd be buying your groceries for the week, and then you'd get a phone call and you'd just take all your groceries with you and you'd be out on the road. You'd just pack your bag and you'd be gone. But looking back, what I enjoyed the most it was the team. I mean, it really taught me the value of a team, of the people. I mean, I'm still friends with a lot of the people that were on that team because, I mean, those are your brothers and sisters, and the laughs that you have, you know, sitting for 18, 20 hours a day, calling, and we had telephones. I mean, this was back in the 80s, and you know, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars of this high-tech equipment, and you know, calling somebody in the middle of the night on the radio and telling a stupid joke, and everyone thought it was hilarious. I mean, these are the people that you remember, you have lifetime relationships with.
Yeah, I was thinking about when I was in Germany too. We still didn't know who we were fighting and what to do, so we were kind of scared of everybody, but not sure how to deal with any of it. You know, I think back, like, we're going to drive around Germany, and when we did the strategic stuff, it was completely different than the tactical stuff. Yes, some of the skills blend across, but you talk to people a lot more in an overt, aggressive manner when you're tactical, because you have to go engage people. You have to. That's your lifeblood. But on the strategic side, we hardly ever talk to anybody unless you were specifically doing a case of some kind. Like, there wasn't a lot of like, go into the cafe and have a bunch of conversations. Like, go into the cafe and be invisible for 5 hours, please.
Exactly, exactly. Well, we worked, one of the cases that I worked that I can talk about because it came out in the news was the Albert Sambalay case. And he was a specialist during Desert Shield, Desert Storm in Baumholder, Germany. And he was assigned to an artillery unit, and he was trying to sell troop deployment information and his unit was in Kuwait. And so we followed him around for several months, and that was probably the biggest case that I worked because, I mean, this guy, he was a traitor, and we followed him for several months. And gosh, I think anything that could have happened on that operation anything that could have happened bad or wrong did happen wrong. One of the he would go into Belgium. And so, you know, how do you surveil somebody who went into Belgium when you don't have clearance to go into Belgium? So we would line up on the Belgian border and we would wait for his car to come back into Germany. And then we would pick him up when he would come back in. And so one of my teammates just got out on foot and he started going into the woods so he can watch, you know, the border, and the Polizei saw him do that, you know, so he's running into the woods with a radio, and then they wound up sending the dogs after him. So he was chased into the woods by the border guard dogs, and he you know, did the thing that happens in the movies. He tripped, he fell, his radio broke. So for 2 hours we thought he had been eaten alive by border guard dogs. So that happened. I was involved in the chase, trying to catch up to our traitor, and got into a major car accident. Wound up in the hospital overnight, and I wound up in a lookout across the street from his house. So we did a sting operation, and Connie Huff was the case agent on this case. So they wound up in a hotel room with him, and he agreed to spy for a Middle Eastern entity. And I remember I was across the street from his house with a sprained ankle, and they said that he was going to be arrested at the gate to his housing community. And I thought to myself, okay, you know, I'm disappointed. It's nighttime. Maybe I'll see, you know, some lights or a siren or something that's going on, you know, just to see an American spy be arrested. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting, and next thing I know, he pulled up in front of his house. And then the next thing I know, a car pulled up behind him and he got arrested. And I just remember the feeling, watching Albert Sambalay get arrested in front of my eyes. And we went to his trial and he wound up getting 34 years in prison. And it was like the highlight of my 28-year law enforcement career, happened when I was 20 something years old. But yeah, it's just, to be part of history, to watch somebody who's trying to hurt our country that way. I mean, it definitely was the highlight of my career.
Yeah, as a CI guy, we hear these legends about these times. It's like, oh, don't forget about the time when the guy did this with the East Germans, and I know these cases because it's part of our legend. So when you say you were there when he gets cuffed up, it's incredible that you get to experience that. And I guess I want to continue on a little bit longer on this conversation. Surveillance is not what everybody thinks it is. It's so easy. This is for the audience. It's so easy to lose someone who's not even trying to lose you. I can't imagine, you've done way more surveillance than I have, Gina. I can't even imagine how you hold on to somebody who knows that if I cross the international border, or if I just go this direction, this here, you're never going to be able to hold on to them. It's so hard, even with normal things. Like the simplest thing is, if someone goes and gets gas, you don't know why they got gas. Are they really getting gas? Do we follow them? What do we got to do? Now we got someone there getting gas, but they can't get, it's like all these questions that happen. It's so hard to follow someone. Talk a little bit about the challenges and the time. Yeah, you're waiting at the border. That means that you're really literally waiting at the border.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't for one moment allow any kind of holes in the thing. You don't just assume that they're not going to go through at 3 a.m.
Right. It would be hours and hours. And there was a time that we had like a 78-hour surveillance from the time we left until the time we got back, because we had learned that someone was going to steal classified material, and they had put what they call a burn bag in the trunk of their car. And they were supposed to go and burn it, but they didn't burn it. So we were following that around for like 70 something hours. And when you have all of your bags and you want to go to a hotel and take a shower, but you can't. It's a really difficult job when you're tired. And I think we probably had 3 car accidents during that operation, but you just have to stay alert, as alert as you possibly can. And remember, this was back in the 80s, where you had the Russian trade craft. So, these spies were taught, Sambalay wasn't, but some of the spies that we had gone after, they were taught the dead drops and all of the different counter surveillance moves. So it was definitely challenging, and we were able to detect some of that. But it was a lot like being in a movie, because you just never knew what you were going to wind up doing in any given day. And we had changes of appearance. We would change our appearance so we wouldn't get caught, because you can only look like a big blonde so much in Germany before someone would recognize you in 2 different cities or what have you. So yeah, it was definitely what you read in Robert Ludlum novels.
Yeah, and again, staying on the surveillance theme, just because it's interesting, when someone goes and does something as simple as like go to the gas station and run in and get a snack, you don't know what their intention is. And if they're trying to hide their communication, and so they go into an open, obvious public place, and I don't know, I'll pick something up. They take the chocolate Hostess donuts and they flip the package around and put it on the top. That might be the signal for the handler. It's like, okay, the meeting is on. And you as the agent chasing this, you have no clue. And so you're looking at, what does he touch? But you can't be like staring at him the whole time. You have to be nonchalant.
Yeah.
Impossible,
Yeah.
You don't want to get caught, and you take the time to cover your tracks. So it always strikes me how labor intensive it is and how much time it takes. We had Jack Barsky on, and I'm like, dude, you were an embedded Eastern German agent in the States. How did you even sleep? I mean, you're always worried about being caught. You're always trying to cover your tracks. You're always trying to communicate back to, it's like so much stress, so much time, so many resources put into all that,
Yeah, and we were undercover, so we were always, the men had beards on my team.
Right.
And we were, on that Sambalay investigation, there were instances where, a couple of our guys were arrested by the military police, where they weren't actually arrested, but they were picked up by the military police because, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment in our trunks, and it was during the storm. And so, there were a lot of things you have to work out, and we were undercover. So yeah, it was a lot. And one time I was taking photographs near the concern, and someone called it in, and the next thing you know, the bomb holder SWAT team, the Polizei, was in town looking for a blonde taking pictures. So yeah, so we had to get out of town before the Polizei showed up. So yeah, it could be pretty dangerous, because the Polizei would come up on you, and you would hear a clink on your window, and you'd look up, and it would be their AK-47 tapping on your window to try and get your attention. So yeah, it could be pretty dangerous.
We're going to get off this topic here in a minute, but I mean, it's so interesting when we get to talk about the aspects of it. When that tap is on your window, you've got to decide, like, okay, how much am I allowed to say? Do I just need to be honest at this point, even though it breaks my cover? Whatever it is someone above aware and already working? And at a time before cell phones, it's not easy. And in a time before cell phones, someone who's got a bunch of radios in their car and gets pulled over, like, that's not going to be good. Even if you haven't broken the law, you're going to be busy for the next couple of days, probably answering to the Germans, waiting for the American. It can really foul up your mission. So you really have a lot to figure out ahead of time, so that when you're there, whatever, you have a reason to be there, and you can explain why you have all this expensive equipment in your car.
Exactly. And terrorism was big during the 80s in Germany as well. So we had to be careful that they didn't see us as terrorists.
Yeah, the last time I did some contract surveillance, the people I was with didn't have a higher level of training. They just sort of did like PI style, which is not a problem. But, when I'm asking questions like, well, when did we break contact? How hard are we following this guy? How known can we be? Are we harassing? All the questions that you and I would ask, so we know how we're playing the game. And they're like, we're just going to follow him. I'm like, what if he gets on a BART train? What if he gets on an airplane? Like, are expenses authorized? Or do we just say, hey, this guy, let him go? Because you don't, sometimes in surveillance, for the audience, you don't want to jeopardize your presence. And so you literally let the person go if you have to. So, these kind of questions. And so I was sitting in front of someone's house outside of this subdivision. And my friend who happened to work in the area said, hey, and he works for the 9/11 Center. And so they call the cops, and he's like, hey, are you here in town? And I'm like, I am. And he's like, someone called the cops on you. And I'm like, I can figure, I'm in a neighborhood sitting in my truck, but that's what you do when you're on surveillance. And luckily we had planned the police part of it. And so, he was able to say, yeah, that guy's working. It's okay. And they left me alone. But it's something as simple as that. And it doesn't make you a bad spy. If someone sees you sitting in a neighborhood in your truck, where else am I going to sit? I can't sit in their house. You have to sit in the truck. So you have to coordinate with the police and then have a cover story. I'm just waiting for some anything in closing on Army counterintelligence and funny stories from what happened in your career?
Oh gosh, funny stories. Well, it's funny you were talking about sitting. We used to call it the lace curtain mafia, because the German lady used to call the Polizei on us all the time. The German ladies used to look through their lace curtains, and they would call the police on us all the time. It was just a great experience. I mean, I like I said, I went from a cocktail waitress to to an Army counterintelligence agent, but I was really fortunate. I got my degree, and that's how I wound up getting into the FBI, by having such great experience. So it was definitely a once in a lifetime opportunity to work during the end of the Cold War in such an exciting field.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because one of the things that we know is, depending on the era and everything else, it's typically pretty hard to transition from Army CI over into the FBI, because they, like, you're kind of already set in your ways and they want you to be FBI style. So what was it that got you over the edge? Because it's, I would say, maybe 2% of the agents that try to transition get in. I mean, it's not an easy path.
Well, when I got into the FBI, there had been a 4-year hiring freeze, or about a 3.5-year hiring freeze. And out of every person who applied, only 100 and I think it was less than 1% of the people who applied actually got into the academy. So it was really, really hard to get in. But I think it was the fact that, I mean, I had such great experience coming from the Army. I think it was, I mean, I'm a good problem solver. I think I had what it takes, but it was a really hard process to get in because you have to take, they have phase 1 testing, which is a test and a judgment test. They have phase 2 testing, which is an interview process, plus a polygraph, plus a physical fitness test and all of that. So, but yeah, I wound up, after a year and a half, I wound up getting in. So I was really fortunate to get a seat at Quantico.
Were you still in the Army when you transitioned over, or did you get out and have
I did not. Yeah, I had gotten out. And so I got out of the Army in 92, and then I got into the FBI in 1996.
Oh, okay. Wow. And you're right. That hiring freeze made it hard. And then for my career, when I got into CI, I followed a big wave of promotable people. And so one of the things my boss said to me as I was considering reenlistment or whatever, she's like, you should get out, go get some other experience, go do something else, because no matter what you do, you're always going to be behind this glut of people, and you'll always be behind them, you know? And I'm like, yeah, but the timing is such an important part of all this stuff. When you got into the FBI, do you feel like you were more law enforcement centric? I mean, like me, I'm a people person. I want to go run sources. I want to go talk to people. But a lot of folks in our field, they want to put cuffs on people. They want to solve crimes. And you definitely went down that route. Is that more of your sweet spot, was the criminal side?
You know, I was assigned, my first assignment was to a counterintelligence squad, but we also worked applicants and civil rights on that squad, and terrorism. I mean, this was before 9/11. So I received a civil rights case where Thai girls were being brought in the United States and forced into prostitution. It was an involuntary servitude case. So I thought, okay, I know absolutely nothing about prostitution. I know nothing about involuntary servitude. And I thought I was going to be working counterintelligence. So I wound up kind of working that case. And that took me down to Little Saigon, which is a district in Orange County, which is the largest population of Vietnamese people outside of Vietnam. And then one thing led to the other, and I wound up on a task force working Asian organized crime for the next 5 years. So I didn't work counterintelligence ever again. Actually, a little bit after that, when I got into management. But yeah, after I got that case, I just kind of started working Asian organized crime, and that was it. So yeah, I went to criminal and worked that for a long time.
Do you think that is the right thing for you? Like, did you end up in the right spot, or do you think you would have been happy as well on the source side?
You know, I absolutely loved it. And I am a people person. And I wound up in the Westminster, in the city of Westminster for a reason. I had absolutely no idea that the chief of police in Westminster hated the FBI. I just wound up looking at this case file, and there was an article where 2 Thai women were rescued in the city of Westminster. So I decided I was going to get into my powder blue Ford Taurus and take a ride over to the Westminster Police Department and see if somebody could help me on this case. And the first time I went over there, I talked to Detective Tommy Ratcliffe, and he was reluctant to talk to me because the chief hated the FBI, and he gave me some information and sent me on my way. And the second time I went over there, the chief intercepted me and said he would let them work one case with me. And like I said, that turned into 5 years of working on this task force. But, for me, it was great because I was the only FBI agent on this team, and I was able to work everything from money laundering to murder for hire to extortions. So I really learned a lot. And again, I love the team environment. So working with the detectives was a lot of fun too.
In our line of work, when you are trying to figure out what you're going to do next, sometimes you go out into the field and you talk to people and you just kind of sniff around above the network and information flows in. Sometimes stuff just walks in the door. As an agent, FBI agent, is it the same kind of thing? Or do you go read a news story and be like, I better look into this? Or is this, do you get so many phone calls? You're just always, how does that flow of work happen as you're trying to figure out what's next?
When I was in that environment at the Westminster Police Department, we would have walk-ins all the time. I mean, we had a huge loan sharking case. Just walk in because a guy who was this gambler who was just an addict, a gambling addict. He walked in and he owed money to every loan shark in town, and they were all going to kill him. And so in order to preserve his life, he came in, told us that, this guy's going to kill me, this guy's going to kill me, and this guy's going to kill me because I owe him 10% per week and I can't pay it off. So loan sharking is illegal. So we were able to, take out a bunch of the different loan sharks in town, and, who were extorting and threatening to kill different the community. So that was interesting. And just getting cases that way, and also, different leads from other field offices that come in that you can turn into cases. So I never had a problem creating cases because they always seemed to show up whenever I was looking for something.
You run across, Orange County is full of so many variables, it's just insane. There's 3.5 million people here, and not even a mile from my house. And I live in a very safe neighborhood. In the last 12 months, I think 2 people have been murdered, like up front, close, like stuck with the knife, kind of murdered, but our neighborhood is wonderfully safe. That's how complex Orange County is. When you guys are looking for what to go after and you're going after things, does this stuff all link together? Is it a bigger crime syndicate that has sub tentacles, or is this just different people, groups of people that are extra legal, and then it just keeps growing from there?
Well, it just depends on what type of crime it is. Like working Asian organized crime, they were you would have your different crime groups that were linked together, because you would have your gangs that were linked together, and that's the same for the different gangs in Santa Ana or other gangs like that. But or organizations link together. But I had a guy who lived 2 doors down from me who wound up taking hostages in a bank and shot somebody. So you just never know what's going to happen in your neighborhood. And I think I had a terrorist who lived not too far from here. Oops, excuse me.
That's the thing that's crazy about all this, is just when you realize how close all this stuff is to where you're at. It's insane. But on a day-to-day basis, someone who lives in Santa Ana, technically I live in Santa Ana, not really, but technically I do. That's what my address will say. You're never going to encounter these people because they're not trying to mess with the big populace. Because if they just go out and start randomly harming people and everything else, people like you go and find them. So, how dangerous is a place like Orange County? Even if there are rapes and murders and all these other things going on, there are still 3.5 million people here. How dangerous is it, do you think?
Yeah, well, it just depends on where you are. There are some parts of it that are really dangerous because there's a large gang population that, are very territorial. And if you don't belong to that gang, then it's going to be a problem. So that's why a lot of these kids are joining these gangs, because of the pressure of not being part of a gang and it being dangerous that way. So there's that. But Orange County is relatively safe, but then you're going to have those pockets of it being dangerous based on the activity.
I want to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes podcast, your show. You've got a podcast. It's a true crime podcast, and basically behind the crime scenes is about, you talk about these cases, like the OJ case. And sometimes these are cases that you've worked, but sometimes they're cases that your peers have worked, and you actually have them come on and talk about what happens in the case. And I want to talk about your new podcast too, but let's first talk about behind the crime scenes, because I think it's a fascinating approach to true crime.
Sure. Yes. It's called Behind the Crime Scene, a true crime podcast, and you can get it on any of your favorite podcast providers. And what we want to do on that podcast is humanize law enforcement and go behind the scenes and talk about how these big notorious cases that we've heard about have impacted these investigators, first responders, and prosecutors, and have haunted them throughout their careers. So we had Bill Hodgman, Marcia Clark's boss, on the show, and he was in charge of the OJ trial. And he talked about how the OJ trial, how that haunted him and how he was found not guilty. And he spent, about 6 minutes talking about what he called the killing cage, where Ron and Nicole, how he believed OJ murdered them, during that time over at Nicole's home. And it was just absolutely fascinating. And I also had an FBI agent a retired FBI agent on the show, and he talked about the BTK killer. And he was 10 years old. He lived in Kansas, and he and his cousins would, go outside, and they the flashlight, and they would put it under their chins, and they would scare each other, and they would talk about how the BTK strangler was going to come and get them, and then they would run into the house. So 20 some odd years later, he was the supervisor of the squad that wound up arresting BTK. So it was just really an interesting, journey for him, and talking about how they wound up apprehending, the BTK strangler based on, how, his quest to be famous. So, we had some pretty interesting stories.
Yeah, for sure. And look down below if you're on the video side, you can see the case, the link for the OJ case episode. If you just go to the behindthecrimescenes.com, all the episodes are there. I want to ask you about, in the last, say, 10 years or so, the FBI as an organization has taken quite a bit of hits on its credibility, and I think as an organization. And then we see a lot of documentaries where we see prosecutors and investigators who get wrapped up on one person. And then as we're getting better with DNA, we're starting to realize that we've put a lot more innocent people in jail than we realize. And I'm not putting blame on anybody, but when you're trained to do this, you start putting the pieces together and you start making jumps, it seems like it would be impossible to go, well, what if it's somebody else? Like, it's really hard to do that. We watched the John Benet Ramsey thing, and that poor family suffered and suffered and suffered. We don't know who did it, and it doesn't seem like they did it, but boy, they sure were put through it. I'm thinking about the Vallejo PD, who went publicly and called the lady a liar, who was kidnapped and brutally raped for days. And they called her a liar and said she made it all up and basically ruined her life. So we have a lot of appropriate mistrust when we get these things wrong, or when we find out 25 years later we put the wrong person in jail. How much does that weigh on you as an investigator? How much are you able to hold yourself accountable to go, am I doing the right thing? Like, this is really going to impact this person's life if I'm wrong. Like, I'm thinking about, I think it's an Orange County case. He was a medical examiner, and his semen sample ended up contaminating the evidence. And so they came after him. I don't know if you recall this case, and he ultimately killed himself because there was no way out of this box. And it turns out, just for the audience, medical examiners use their own semen samples as a control. So there was some kind of cross-contamination. And, they didn't find out until it was too late, and this guy's life was ruined and he killed himself.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility to be in law enforcement. It's a lot of responsibility to be an FBI agent. And I took that responsibility seriously. I mean, I can't speak for anyone else but myself.
Right.
I was very, I knew when I did my investigations that I had to make sure that I had all of the evidence. Plus more evidence to make sure that I was able to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that the person did what I said that they had done. Very rarely did I ever wind up going to trial. I think in my entire career, I may have gone to trial maybe once or twice, just based on the amount of evidence that I put forth. So, but mistakes are made. I get that. But you're absolutely right. We hold the responsibility, just based on the positions that we have, to not make mistakes. And, but we're human. So I know I don't want to be flippant by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. Well, and the thing is, as a counterintelligence guy, I'm just speaking for me now. When I hear a politician, Secretary Clinton, say, I had TSSCI on my server, I take responsibility for it, and there's no prison time, there's no fine, I cannot take the FBI seriously as an organization, because you and I both know if we did that, it'd be a big problem. And I'm not making a political statement. It's just a counterintelligence fact statement. As soon as that stuff's on an external hard drive, I assume it's compromised, because that's what I would do. That'd be my job, right? Is to find that, get into that crew and exploit that information. So
Right.
it compromises. But when you're Samantha Runyon's parents, the FBI is vital to finding out what happened to your little daughter, and without someone, I mean, this is where the FBI shines. You can't really reliably kidnap somebody and expect to get away with it in the United States. You can do that 90 miles to the south of Mexico, but you can't do that here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in fact, Samantha Runyon's mother, we had on our Behind the Crime Scene podcast. And, the sheriffs did an amazing job on bringing Alejandro, I forget what his last name was, the person who killed her, to justice. That was an amazing case that they did with the DA's office.
What links go to people that get these cases? The BTK killer, these other things with the FBI, even the McMillions case. I mean, what a mess that case was, and they've got to figure it out. Is there a common thread between these agents that see these things through and get some resolution? Or is this just what you guys do as pros?
It's just a lot of dedication. And the FBI, the average age of the FBI agents going through the academy is 31 years old. So you have people who are in their second career, who have worked really hard to get into that position, who take it very seriously. They're professionals before they actually make it into the FBI. So I can just tell you that all of the people that I worked with in the FBI were just amazing professionals, and they see it through, and they're persistent, and they are determined to make sure that, they make their cases, and they're strong cases, and they make sure that justice is served.
Yeah, we were taught to be above reproach, to not just go to the nth degree, go to the oath and the peath and the arth degree. Like, make sure that everything is how it should be, because you are going to be attacked. People are going to question your integrity. And so you can't compromise it at all. I want to transition into your new podcast project. And then, look, as someone who does what you do, the COVID crisis had to kind of impact your ability to go out and speak and, be as present. So how are you adapting with all of that as well?
Well, I am doing my podcasts, and I'm super excited about this new podcast that's coming out on the 23rd of February. It is called Lead Like a Lady, and it is for women who are working in actually it's for all women, and it's for men as well. And what I do is I feature women like me who have worked in male-dominated work environments, and they pretty much talk about their experiences and give advice, and they tell their stories. And it's really intended for the women who are coming up behind us. So I've got the United States Marshal for the state of New Mexico, Sonia Chavez, who is absolutely brilliant. I've got a construction maven, a roofing maven. I've got Betty Thomas, who is, she was on Hill Street Blues, if you remember the big
Sure.
on Lucy on Hill Street Blues, and she wound up becoming one of Hollywood's highest grossing female directors, just absolutely fabulous. I've got a woman who runs a $200 million petroleum company. So you have all of these amazing, strong women who really, really want to give back to their communities, and just wonderful stories. And I'm just really so proud to be able to share these stories.
You and I have asked a lot of questions of people in our professional life over the years. Has that translated into how you podcast and what you ask, or do you look for something else? And do you have to turn the special agent off? Because sometimes, look, some of us we get tracked focused. I've asked a lot of questions, but in a different way than a normal special agent would. How have you learned about questioning?
I like to tell stories. I've always wanted to be a writer. I'm in the process of trying to sell a book that I've written a proposal for, and I've always wanted to write television shows. I've got a pilot that I'm working on. And so I take the interviews that I've done, and I go back and I edit them, and I make a story out of them, because I really, really want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have just such a really great ending that people are going to remember and have just profound meaning that they can take with them after it's done. So that's, but I still use my interviewing skills, and I like to insert, experiences that I had as well. So I definitely use the interviewing skills that I've learned, but I think I add a little bit more to it in the editing process, just to make it more of a story.
What are a couple interview tricks that you use, from the field that you learn? Like, I like to ask a question, what keeps you up at night? Because it's such a great question, because it
Yeah.
just gets right to it. Everything else before that is bullshit. What keeps you up at
Yeah.
night? What are
Yeah.
some of your questions like that?
I don't think it's a specific question, but I really, it's easy to, and I mean, since you interview people a lot, it's easy to act as if your journey was easy, by just kind of, staying on top of the water. But I really like to get down and understand what the struggles were, because that's where you really reach the authenticity of a person, when you understand that it wasn't easy, that it really was a struggle, that it took a lot of perseverance, and they had a lot of obstacles. And I want to hear how they navigated those obstacles, and how they had to try 50 times before they got a yes, that they got so many no's, and all of that, because we root for the underdog. And I may have all of these super poised women, but I kind of keep talking to them until I kind of find the parts that may not be perfectly poised, and that's what I'm looking for in these interviews, so they more relatable to the people who are listening.
I agree 100%. I mean, this is sort of what people like us do. I like to say I listen for things, not to the
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
And when I hear that thing, I'm like, well, stop, go back. What happened? How did you
Yeah.
end up, sleeping on this person's couch? Like, what,
Yeah.
this didn't just go to, and then I signed $1 million deal. Like, no, there was some fear in there. There was some luck. There was someone from the out, these things happen, and they're what make it fascinating. And the example I always give is I had a guy named Andy on the show. He's very, very, very successful in the world of sports photography. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, for crying out loud. And he's taking all of the shots for the NBA. I mean, just all of the big shots, Michael Jordan, all of these things. And he got into that business. I mean, he was there, like on the field all the time. When Kirk Gibson hit his home run, he was the first guy to home plate. That's how impactful this guy is. But he didn't start there. And so I'm like, how did you end up in LA? You're a Jewish kid from the Northeast. Now you're in LA. I don't. And he's like, well, I saw this billboard. And I'm like, yeah. But how did you end up in LA? He's like, oh, my sister, Didi Khan. She played Frenchie in Greece. And I'm like, that is what I'm talking. People like us, we hear that moment and we're like, nope, there's something else there. Please continue,
Yeah. Well, that's why I always like to tell people that I started as a cocktail waitress, because that's where I started. I mean, I didn't come up with, my dad was a plumber, and my mom was a housewife. And when my parents got divorced, my mom had to go out and get a job, because she had been a stay-at-home mom for all this time. And when I was my first assignment in the Army, I was in Belgium, and I didn't know the difference between essence and gas, and so I put essence in two of our government cards, and we only had two, so I wound up putting diesel gas into both, and I ruined two cars. So yeah, I like to tell my stories about not being perfect, because that's who makes me who I am, and it was all of those lessons along the way that got me into the FBI, believe it or not. So yeah, it's taken me a long time to be able to laugh at myself, but yeah, those are the fun parts that make me, that I remember.
It's something in the military service where we create these opportunities to do things like put diesel in a gas motor, because you aren't the only person to do it, and it's so terribly embarrassing and it's expensive, but we haven't figured out how to make it stop from happening. You're like, I don't know. I've just always grabbed the hose and put, like, we never use diesel or whatever, I don't speak this language. And yet it happens I probably could tell you 20 people I know that have done that same thing,
Oh my
and
God.
only because hearing their stories and they're being mortified have I thought, oh, am I doing this right? Am I, otherwise I would have known. I easily could have done it myself, easily.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, the thing that did come out of it is we never had a relationship with the transportation guys. There were some Belgian guys over in our transportation unit, and they were never very friendly with us. But after I did that, they sure were. So some good came out of it anyway.
That's right. That's right. You know, any way to get a source going in the right direction.
Exactly.
When you were in the Army as a counterintelligence agent, what was it like to be a female at that time? Because in my era, there were a lot, but they were still sort of figuring out what it meant. I think, like the thing I learned, and I learned this through experience, not through the schoolhouse, was that women are fantastic collectors. You know, because you can literally sit in a room and be invisible in most foreign cultures, and then you open your mouth, and they're just like, "Oh my God, it's a woman talking," and they just, I'm like, "How are they? It's so easy."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So how was it for you?
Yeah, I was the only woman in my unit when I was in Belgium. So I was the only woman. And I remember when I got there, we had no relationship with the gendarmerie. And my captain, you know, he said, okay, you're in charge of doing name checks. Okay, that was my big job, was doing name checks. But you have to go over to the gendarmerie, but they're not going to do it for you. And so I don't even know what to do. So I'm like, okay, well, let me go over to the gendarmerie. So here I am, this 21-year-old blonde girl from California. And I go over to the gendarmerie. And next thing you know, they are bending over backward to be nice to me. so there were times when it worked really, really well. and there, you know, but I don't really remember the times when it didn't work out well, and maybe, you know, it's selective memory for me. You know, I guess I do. There were, I mean, I remember the times where it was hard, but I think I just worked hard to get around those obstacles. I think I just kind of hunkered down and became even more determined through it, and figure out a way to get around it so that I can get whatever it was that I was trying to achieve. So but yeah, I remember it, you know, using whatever skills that I had to accomplish what I needed to.
As someone who's trained counterintelligence people to be good source collectors, I always like, what do you have available, right? Like, what's there? And airplane going overhead, but it's hard because you take a Mormon person, and if someone offers me a shot, I'm going to do a shot no matter what, because I'm not Mormon. But if you're Mormon, you now have this other competing morality, right? And I've had agents say, "Oh, I would never do that." I'm like, "Then you shouldn't do this job." It doesn't mean you have to do everything, but you have to be. I mean, I eat medium rare pork in Bosnia all the time because that's what was offered by the farmer I was trying to talk to, and you don't start. You can certainly try to start by rejecting their food from their pig that they killed, that they raised, or you could just eat the damn food. So when it comes to females, I mean, I've seen girls that are women that are comfortable taking off their blouse top to their t-shirt and letting the boobs do the work. And I've seen girls that are like, I would never do that. I want to do this, you know, 100%, and like give themselves extra obstacles, whether they could do it or not. What are your thoughts on that? Like using what's available. You're a blonde from California. Just right there, you already have the Middle East wanting to talk to you, you know?
Yeah, but I don't think I ever had to take my blouse off to get to do that. I don't think I went that far ever. I didn't go that.
When I say blouse in the Army, it's the outer shirt, and underneath you have a normal.
Exactly.
You're not exposing yourself.
You know, I think I definitely used my personality and my charms. I mean, I definitely, to be able to, you know, be friendly and be sweet and be kind and be charming. Definitely I would do that. On the other hand, I mean, I remember doing an investigation and interviewing a first sergeant, and he told me that, and I was in civilian clothes, and he told me that all of the women in the Army were lesbians. So I remember that one pretty good. That was one that I don't think I'll ever forget. And if I were in uniform, I don't know if he would even have spoken to me, because I think I was probably a specialist at the time. So yeah, I mean, I think you just have to, use your personality and, there was a time when I was an assistant special agent in charge in the FBI, and I don't drink. I mean, I never drank. It's not a religious thing. It's just, I don't like the taste of alcohol. And I went out with, a delegation of Chinese generals and colonels because they came to visit us here in Orange County. So they brought moonshine with them, and they wanted it. We all went out to dinner, and they brought, they put out the shot glasses, and that was the thing. They wanted to get us all drunk. And I don't drink, and I had no problem not drinking because I knew that they were going to get so plastered that they weren't going to remember me not drinking at the end of the day anyway. But I think you just have to, there are times, you just have to kind of go with the flow, and you just have to be who you are and be authentic to yourself. And if it's going to get in the way, maybe you should choose another career field. But, but if you can kind of massage it with your charm or your personality or whatever, maybe you can get away with it.
Yeah. Or if you're going to be harder, if you're not going to be as agreeable, then just be ready to deal with that. I mean, just know that that's a hurdle you're going to put up, and pre-think that. And I never minded that. Like, if you want to wear a hijab because we're in the Middle East, okay, but you don't have to. And I would remind, your hair might be the thing that makes this person drop their guard, and you're not going to offend them because you're not Islamic, but it's hard. It's your choice. You have to work with your own skills. Hey, I've asked you a bunch of questions. Do you want to ask me anything while we're sitting here?
You know what? Let me bring that up as far as the hijab, because I went to Egypt and I brought a scarf with me, but I thought I'm not going to wear it. And then the amount of attention that I got for not wearing it the first 15 minutes I was in country, I wound up wearing it the rest of the time. I felt so uncomfortable not wearing it. I wound up wearing it. So it's just a matter of, I don't think it's like I'm taking a stand, I'm not going to do it. It's like sometimes you just decide, you know what, I'm going to do this because it's easier just to do it versus not doing it.
I think it's important to consider it, though, to balance it out. Like, am I going to make this choice? And then why am I making it? And is it true to who I am? Right. But don't just wear it at a submission unless you intend to use that to your advantage in some. I mean, we're always looking for that lever to pull to get the advantage and the influence that we want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just remember, and that's why I love this podcast, because the Lead Like a Lady podcast is because, I am coming from a place of authenticity now. And when I was younger, just coming up, trying to make a place for myself, and you're bringing up so many good points, because I mean, I wasn't authentic, trying, working in a male dominated field, trying to be taken seriously as a 20-something-year-old former cocktail waitress, in a counterintelligence world. So yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting theme, and that's the whole reason why I'm creating the podcast, so I can have these conversations, so women who are coming up behind me can learn from my mistakes. Sure.
And I would also add that thing, when you go to immerse yourself on a team of dudes, the rules change instantly as soon as you show up, whether anybody wants them to or not. I mean, actually, the woman that says, "Oh, I'm one of the guys who can always make jokes around me," we all know that's not true. Like, this person is very sensitive to these things. We have to learn how to deal with it because she's part of the team. The other thing I want to say is it's also, it doesn't do you any good to over masculine, like to be extra masculine just because you're in the military. Because now you're aping something that's not you. I've always, whenever I worked with and for females in the military, I always appreciate the ones who were the most authentic to who they were. Like, they have different nature. They have a different approach to things. Don't just try to be a dude, because it doesn't serve you as a leader and me as someone who's trying to be on your team, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. I was a Barbizon School and Modeling graduate when I was 14 years old. I had a full face of makeup and hair everywhere I went.
That's fantastic. I also want to mention my friend Shelly Klingerman. She focuses on female security, and we were on the show the other day, and we had Clint Emerson, who's a former SEAL who writes all those 100 skills to whatever, what 100 things in your house you can kill someone with, that kind of a book. And we were talking about the female aspect of security, because that's where Shelley, that's where her sweet spot is. And just being able to say, hey, you're making me uncomfortable, or proactively taking your security into your own hands and not worrying about making somebody you don't know upset because they're walking too close behind you, or whatever it is. And just all of these things that, as someone who leads like a lady, it's okay to be a bit of a hard ass and go, hey, I don't like what you're doing. And you can always back off. I'm sorry, I overstepped. I didn't realize, but I would rather see anyone take care of themselves over allowing something terrible to happen to them. Any thoughts on that in terms of, you don't want to just be a bitch, but sometimes you've got to assert yourself. Any thoughts on that at all?
Being able to communicate what you're thinking is so important. And I am a big advocate for say what you think. And, you don't have to sugarcoat it. And especially in that type of situation, if you feel that you are in danger in any way, I mean, that is not the time for you to be polite in any way, shape, or form. So definitely, scream or yell or tell that person in a stern voice to get away from you immediately. And usually when you take, if you knock somebody off guard just by, shouting at them, then that will, run them off and scare them away. But even if you're feeling uncomfortable, or if, because you feel like you want to be one of the guys or what have you, and someone says something inappropriate or they take it, far beyond what you're comfortable with, have the conversation, because communication is key to conflict resolution. And you have to set boundaries. Boundaries are so important when you first go into your work environment, because you don't want to be 5 years down the road and you never set boundaries. And now you're tolerating all of these different things that you should never have been tolerating in the first place. So you've got to set the boundaries straight off the bat, and it's not being, like you said, being the bee. Well, I don't want you to do this and I don't want you to do this, but there's a smooth way, and there's a calm way, and there's a polite way, just to set your boundaries, and that's important.
Yeah, boundaries are a big thing. Anything inside the circle, I will act decisively. And you can have a circle outside of that. It's sort of how a lot of us combat guys think of it. Like, if you're in this circle, you're going to have my full attention. Now, everything else I was doing is secondary. Now, this is the thing I'm going to deal with. Anything in closing at all? You want to ask me any questions or anything else?
Gosh, I think what you're doing is great. I mean, I think it's important to expose our former mission to the masses.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It's fun too. It's fun to have the conversations. I mean, we didn't reveal any secrets, but it is a lot of there's a whole lot of boredom in that job, and a whole lot of egos. Goodness gracious, we have egos in that. But just for the audience to know, anyone who thinks they're if you went into a room full of special agents and said, raise your hand if you're well above average, every hand would go up. And then raise your hand if you think the person next to you is above average. Be like, all the hands would go down. We are some ego-driven people.
Well, you had to be above average in order to be able to get into the MOS. You had to have a high ASVAB score.
I know, but amongst ourselves.
Oh, yeah. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Did you ever go to the FCITIC course?
Nope. I was tactical. I didn't even get a chance to do it.
Got it. Yeah. That was interesting. There were 12 of us, and there were 10 men and 2 women. And the other woman in the class was, because I'm almost 6 feet tall, and was 6 feet tall, and she was a redhead and I was a blonde. But when we were out doing surveillance for the training, it was funny because they would always get us mixed up. They couldn't tell the 6-foot blonde and the 6-foot redhead apart. So we were the same person as far as they were concerned.
That's great. And people in the military can't say last names. My last name is Turner. I've been called Tucker, Tyler, Taylor, Sanders. Like, Sanders? Sanders. How did you get saved? Like, you just make shit up. It's so silly.
Next time we'll have to talk about basic training stories. I got a lot of basic training stories.
Oh my God. Yeah. So for everybody who wants to get more of what Gina does, GinaLosborn.com. Nice and simple. If you're watching, it's right there. If you're listening on the podcast side, it'll be in the show notes. If you want to check out the True Crime crime podcast. It's called Behind the Crime Scene. If you type that in, you will find it, I promise. And then she'll have the new one, Lead Like a Lady. And there's actually a group for that on Facebook. You can go over to follow. You can just follow Lead Like a Lady on Facebook, and you'll be able to get a hold of what Gina is doing over there. Anything else you want to say before I shut this thing down?
Yes, Lead Like a Lady will be coming out on February 23rd.
2021. Okay, stand by. I'm going to run a video.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.